You are listening to WHOA Podcast, coming to you from Gainesville, Florida. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the WHOA GNV Podcast, the podcast bringing you businesses and individuals that make you go, whoa. Today on the show, we have Richard Allen, a Gainesville-based entrepreneur who's co-founded a number of companies, including several that are on the NASDAQ, and it goes on and on and on. I'm not even going to try to summarize this man's history, this man's bio. But Richard, thank you so much for being here, man.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
Why don't you quickly give us, we're going to dive into the origin stories in a minute, but before we do that, why don't you quickly give us just the 30 to 60 second version of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, okay, so been around a long time, been in Gainesville a long time, since 1970. So long enough that we've started a bunch of companies. Among those companies, Regeneration Technologies, RTI Surgical, first NASDAQ company, Axogen, peripheral nerve regeneration company, NASDAQ company out at the park, OrthoHelix, small bone orthopedics company, currently Blue Azoo Scout, have started Exhale Assurance, Exhale Smart, and K-Logics and a number of other companies.
It goes on and on and on.
It kind of does.
Which is awesome. Well, before we dive into your origin story, I want to remind our listeners of a couple things. Well, first, Ty texted me this morning and is like, dude, I am super, super sick. I have food poisoning. I'm definitely not making it. And I was like, oh no. So Ty, our heart goes out to you, man. And we have this feeling. This is going to be pretend Ty today. Ty, you're looking a little white over there, bro. Look at that. Yeah. So we got one of our Halloween skeletons in here filling in for Ty. But so Ty, I hope you feel better, man. And the holiday season's coming up. Just a reminder to everybody who's listening, on Tuesday, December 4th at 10 a.m., we are going to be doing our WHOA GNV holiday extravaganza, which is going to be at Krispy Kreme. Ty and I are giving away Krispy Kreme donuts right off the press, off the hot glaze machine. And we will be out there handing them out for free. So come out to Krispy Kreme and get your donuts and say hi to Ty and I. And
Ty's standby over there looks like he could use a couple of Krispy Kremes, doesn't he?
He certainly does. He looks like he could use some Krispy Kreme donuts and, thicken up a little bit. But no, man, I'm so sorry that he's sick. It was bound to happen. It was bound to happen at some point. It was either going to be him or me, and I'm sure it'll happen again in the future, and we will just learn to roll with the punches, because that's what I'm told you do in business, is that you roll with the punches. Is that true?
Yeah, lots and lots of punches, lots of rolling, right?
Well, cool. I want to now dive deeper into your history. I mean, take us back to what even led you to becoming an entrepreneur and getting on this roller coaster ride of all these different companies. And so please take us back in the day, Richard, please.
Well, I was born in a log cabin.
Is that true?
No, not true, but almost. No, came from a small town in Central Florida, Lake Wales. Always was kind of a science geek on one side, like science and nature, biology, all that kind of stuff. And the other side of, I was always in trying to sell something. So I had we were selling fruit, waxed fruit, door to door when I was probably 8 and 9 years old. By the time I was 11, I think I was raising little white rabbits, and I would go around at Easter time and sell little Easter bunnies door to door.
How old were you at this?
I was probably 11, 12 at that time. By 13, I had my first real paying job. I made 35 cents an hour working at the local theater, and they gave me a waiver so I could work that young. Worked at 13 and 14 at the local theater. I really fell in love with both music and with business. And I had maybe a year and a half that I was running the record store and was making lots of money. But the guy that owned the wholesale chain for that wound up going bankrupt for a lot of personal reasons. He was up in Atlanta. So I had a chance to buy the store. But I wasn't making enough money to be able to afford to buy the inventory. So I go to the banks, say, hey, I just need if this store is making $75,000 a year. I just need maybe a $50,000 loan, and I can scrap together the rest of it. And there was no way in the world banks were going to loan me any money. So at that point, I realized, what, I need to be able to figure out how business really works. So I went back to university, took a couple of extra jobs to be able to get through university, and wound up getting a degree in finance and accounting, got my CPA certificate. Jumped out from there, spent a couple of years doing small business accounting from a CPA firm, which gave me this background into 60 or 70 different businesses and how they work and how their numbers come together and how do they make money. And that was a really great background for me. But at some point, I loved science and I loved technology. And that's where the next evolution took place, because I got a chance to, as part of that, start working with heat pipe technology. A Vietnam refugee had come over, Con Dinh, with his family, a boat person, had started this company a few years later called Heat Pipe Technology. He wanted to be able to license some technology from NASA and didn't know how to do it. I went down to NASA headquarters and negotiated a license for this heat pipe technology that is used usually in satellites to cool the inside of satellites. And he wanted to use it for dehumidification in large commercial air conditioning systems. I licensed the technology for him, took over as CFO with his company, and that led to other technology companies, including Sabine. Anybody that's in the music world probably knows Sabine. They made the world's smallest and best-selling musical instrument tuner.
Yeah, and they're are they still right down the road?
Yeah, they're still right down the road. Actually, Korean-owned, I think, at this point. But bred here in Gainesville. Terrific company. I got involved with him, with Doran, when he was starting that company, because he was using using this new technology to put things down on chips and do manufacturing using pick-and-place machines. And they needed to build this new factory, so I got involved in helping to build the new factory, became CFO with Sabine. At the same time, I'm CFO with Heat Pipe Tech. So I wound up moving more and more into technology and licensing and intellectual property. Started working then with the University of Florida's Office of Technology and Licensing.
Okay, so what years were these?
So these are probably...
how old are you?
So I it was 76 is when I graduated the first time, 80 when I graduated the second time. So this is probably in the 81 to 84, 85 range. And so at that point, I started doing more out licensing from the University of Florida's Office of Technology and Licensing, finding companies that needed to have a specific technology the university had, working with the university's licensing folks to get that marketed, if you will, to some other company. As part of that, the University of Florida introduced me to Jamie Grooms. Jamie Grooms became my partner in regeneration technologies. Jamie had this concept of being able to take allograft tissue from the Organ and Tissue Donation Network, primarily bone tissue from the Organ and Tissue Donation Network. And up until that time, surgeons had to handcraft any time that they wanted to do a bone implant. They would literally have to open the patient up, make a surgical site, open them up, figure out where they needed to have the bone graft, pull out a piece of donor bone and shape it, and then stick it in, see if it worked or not, then pull it back out, reshape it some more, stick it back in. Wow. It was just, it made the procedures really long, really sloppy. They didn't have the precision that they needed. So Jamie's concept was, people make these implants out of metal, and they do it with CNC machines. How about if we built Class 10 clean rooms, put CNC machines in those Class 10 clean rooms, and put bone tissue in instead of putting metal in, and created exactly the same grafts, but they're out of bone tissue. And then we'll cleanse them in a way that they'll have no antigenic response. They're not going to create an immune response in the body. And the body is going to remodel the bone into the patient's own bone over time. And lo and behold, turned out to be a terrific idea. We started Regeneration Technologies. I hit Wall Street, mailed out 60 copies of our business plan to various venture capital groups, went and visited the VC groups, brought in $6 million from some VC groups, built all the Class 10 clean rooms, started the manufacturing process, started selling, 2 years later, in 2000, wound up taking it public. Went out on the NASDAQ, and RTI is still out there as our first big med tech IPO that we did in Gainesville.
And that was number one.
That was number one. Yeah,
That's what's so fascinating about this is that that was the first company to go on NASDAQ, right?
That's right. So Jamie and I spent a couple of years after we took it public there. Then we created a company called Synogen, which is basically just if you will, a small private equity venture fund of our own, with our own funding to start additional companies. From Synogen, we started Axogen next. Axogen is a peripheral nerve regeneration company. So they do, they also organ and tissue donation network, but they're taking just the nerve tissue from the organ and tissue donation network. The nerve tissue then goes through a special processing, and this is processing that was developed at the University of Florida, again, in-licensed from the University of Florida. And you create nerve grafts that are very long nerve grafts, so much longer than you can do with any artificial substance. And with those, you can replace peripheral nerves. So if somebody's been injured in an accident, and their facial nerves, their hand nerves, etc., this allows you to basically replace and regenerate those, and it becomes their own nerve tissue. So it's terrific and really, really effective in the Gulf War and that sort of thing when veterans were returning. So a few years later, it took us probably another 4 to 5 years after we started Axogen to get them public on the NASDAQ. Took them out on the NASDAQ. They're now a very successful company on the NASDAQ, and again, located out in the biotech park in Alachua. Kind of simultaneously, we started several other companies. We started Chaologics, which is the only company in that group that we started that's really not at all medical. Chaologics is based on chaotic computing, which the brain actually uses chaos computing. Again, University of Florida technology that we unlicensed, but it's a way to be able to keep chips secure so that folks people can't use what's called a side channel attack on chips. So it's a chip security for computer chips technology. That wound up being acquired a long time later. It was acquired about 2 years ago by AMD, huge chip company. So a very successful company. Most of the development work we did on that was down in the NASA area. So, we had an office here, but not as much of a team here. We started OrthoHelix, which was a small bone orthopedics company, kind of similar to what we did with RTI, but this was actually done with metals. But they were really tiny little shaped metals that could be used on finger joints and could be used on toes and ankles and wrists and the like. They were acquired by Wright Medical, which is a very large NASDAQ medtech company as well. So those are, I think, the companies that we have that are NASDAQ companies at this point. Except we did have recently Exhale Assurance. Exhale Assurance was a company we started 9 years ago, does pulse oximetry via the side of the nose instead of by a fingertip. And again, University of Florida technology. When you're trying to take somebody's pulse ox signal from their fingertip, you're trying to read their oxygen saturation in their blood. And you're doing it by shooting through their finger, basically a LED laser through their finger, picking up that infrared signal and being able to determine what level of oxygen is in the blood. Well, the problem is you're determining oxygen in the blood from a fingertip out here, which isn't necessarily the same as the blood that's going through your brain. And the blood going through your brain is what you're really concerned about.
Interesting.
On the side of the nose, you have a branching of the internal and external carotid arteries that are coming in and out of the brain itself. And it happens to run right on the side of the nose, on the nasal ala. So the concept at the University of Florida over there was, let's take that same finger pulse oximeter, design it specifically to be able to read the signals from the side of the nose and come up with a really soft little little tiny thing that goes around like a little nose hook on the side of your nose, and it reads that internal and external carotid artery, and you're getting direct feedback from the brain on what the pulse, what your oxygen saturation is. So that became a really, really, really big product and was just acquired about 3 months ago by Philips Healthcare, the Dutch company, big mega company on the New York Stock Exchange. So that's another one of our public companies, and it's here. I don't know if you know this, but we have more. I understand we have more public companies in Gainesville in the medical tech space than Atlanta.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Gosh, I love this place so much. Like UF is just awesome. Well, tell me a little bit about that process. I mean, when you were saying like license from the University of Florida, like was somebody coming up with these ideas and you're like, oh, I can take that and I can sell that? Like what, or like what's that process like?
Yeah, so the university has had a really good, they've been at the lead for a long time here in the United States of the universities that really do a good job of trying to commercialize their technologies. So typically what's going on is you've got a researcher at the University of Florida, whether it's in a medical space or not, who's, they're trying to do something novel and unique, and the Office of Technology and Licensing helps them to get patents on what they're doing. And then the office also tries to find companies that will partner with them and license those technologies or create companies around those licensed technologies that will commercialize them.
So would you say these other opportunities came because of the success of the first?
Yeah, I would say that RTI's success actually predated the change that occurred at Office of Technology and Licensing.
Okay.
We came about 2 years before that. So partially as a result of the success of that, because the University of Florida, I believe the numbers are something like 80 million that the University of Florida made on RTI when we did the whole IPO process. So that was a substantial enough income for them that they realized, wow, this is the right way to do it. They brought in a guy, David Day, who's a really terrific guy, just recently retired from Office of Technology and Licensing, but he ran the OTL license office at the University of Florida for that whole time, from RTI time, right after RTI time until about now. And his philosophy was always, let's license as much as we can license, because I don't know what's going to win. I don't know what's going to be the winner. Let's just get as many licenses out there as possible, get all of our technology out in somebody's hands, and maybe we won't make as much on it as we could have made if we had negotiated a really, really great deal on every technology, but we'll have a lot more opportunity. And so that became his philosophy in how to license. So yeah, they became very aggressive and very proactive about going after all of the scientists and all the researchers at the University of Florida and figuring out what is it that you're working on, and is it something we can patent? And if we patent it, do you want to start a company, or do you know somebody that wants to start a company? Or by the way, we've got these connections over here of folks that would like to start a company. So they're always reaching out, looking for folks that would like to license the technology.
That's great.
They do a really good job of that.
That's really awesome.
Yep.
So you're still not done. No, I'm like following this timeline of events that I have here for you, and so that was So you got to exhale.
Yeah. So the other technology at XAL, there are actually two XAL companies. The other one is one that's also going to be very successful. It's going to be another few years before we have a big event with it. But it is breath-based medication adherence monitoring. So the challenge with medication adherence monitoring, especially in clinical trials, if you can imagine this, you're a pharmaceutical company. You've spent maybe $500 million on developing a drug and getting it up to your phase 2 and phase 3 clinical studies. At phase 2 and phase 3 clinical studies, you're going to be spending another several $100 million. And you're gambling basically on, is this going to be as efficacious as we think it's going to be or not? The facts are that when you put it out into the hands of folks in a phase 2 and a phase 3 clinical study where people have to go home and take the medication, blinded studies show that something on the order of 40 to 60% of the people that are in the study don't even take the medication. And you don't know if they didn't take it, because if you can't interfere with the study to go do a blood draw every week, because if you do that, you're interfering with the study. So you've got to kind of be passive about the study, and you just have to wait until the end and pull off the cover and go, gosh, well, we didn't get the efficacy we needed. well, you probably didn't get the efficacy you needed because half the people didn't take the study med, but you don't know that. So having a way to definitively tell if somebody actually swallowed a med is super important. And what we licensed out of the University of Florida is this concept of putting a taggant, a chemical marker or taggant, on the outside of a med that when you swallow it, it doesn't appear in your breath, but when the capsule transits to your stomach and is absorbed in your stomach, that a metabolite is created of that chemical taggant that we put on, and that metabolite appears in your breath almost immediately. I mean, within 5 minutes, it's going to be in your breath. So you get a reminder from this little device, time to take your medication. You open up your medication, you swallow it, you take it, you push the button, said, yes, I took my medication. All that's being reported in real time. And then 5 minutes later, it lights up and it says, blow into the device. And you blow into the device like a breathalyzer, and bing, gives a little green light and says, oh, great, got it, got your breath sample. And it knows definitively that metabolite was created in your stomach. So you couldn't have taken the medication, put it in your mouth, spit it out, blown into the device, wouldn't work. You have to have the metabolite from your stomach. So it gives you definitive readings. So for pharmaceutical clinical trials, that's the only way to definitively tell. That's going to be a really, really big product. We've been working on it for a long time.
That's insane.
And that leads kind of through a circuitous path, like all of these things, to the current company that I'm working with right now, which is Blue Azoo Scout. Blue Azoo Scout has nothing to do, it would seem, with medical technology. We've got a little GPS tracker that is also an Internet of Things tracker. So it's basically a little board about this big. It's constantly pinging up to the servers, in this case our AWS servers. So it's basically like a little hotspot that's constantly running. It's got accelerometers in it. It's got GPS in it, and so it knows it knows all the time, 24/7, exactly where it is. It's reporting where it is. It's reporting whether it's being moved, whether it's being interacted with, and reporting that up to the internet. And it's called Scout is the technology. Well, the origin of Scout was that when we developed the Exhale Smart Medication Adherence Monitor, that's going to be going into people's homes. In many cases, it's going into the home of somebody that doesn't have a Wi-Fi system. You can't run a clinical trial saying, well, we're only going to select people that have Wi-Fi, because that defies the statistical sampling that you need to do. So this allowed us to have, we needed to develop a little board that would do exactly that. That would be a hotspot 24/7, able to report from within that Exhale Smart device. That first board that we developed for Exhale then became the origin of our Scout device. And to go way back further in the story, the person that is behind our Scout board is Glenn Zelniker. He's a PhD electrical engineer, a few years younger than I am, but we go all the way back to Sabine. So when I went back to that original Sabine story, Glenn was our hotshot young electrical engineer, like 1 or 2 years out of his PhD at the University of Florida. And when we needed to develop a new, we were working on a pro audio sound system. And when we ran into problems with developing the firmware and algorithms in that, Glenn was the guy that could always come in and solve them. He was just brilliant. I lost track of Glenn for a couple of decades at least, during which he was working for Korean companies, for Ford Motor Company, for NASA, doing the development of all this firmware for digital signal processing and the like. And then Glenn ultimately got into the space of placement, and he's the one that originally came to me with this concept of being able to have this mobile hotspot device, if you will, that has become Scout. So Glenn is my partner in Scout. So anyway, it's a long and circuitous and tangled story. Right?
Yeah, well, that's what's so interesting about it, though, because it sounds like a lot of it has almost this waterfall effect. You know, like even the one that led to Scout, for example, like the connections and the entangling of all the companies and even the knowledge and the connection, the relationships, have led you to this point, which is really, really cool.
I've always loved being in partners with somebody. I go back with all these companies that I've been involved with. I've never been a sole proprietor, like the only owner of a company. I've always had at least one or two or three partners.
So tell me a little bit about that, because I think that'll bring a ton of value to our audience. I mean, I was in a partnership in my early days, and we split after 2 years and had a different vision. Things didn't work out, and I think it's vital to. I mean, it's a marriage.
Yeah,
I mean, partnerships are a marriage, right?
It definitely is a marriage, and I'm happy to say that almost all, not 100%, but almost all of my partnership relationships in the past we're still really, really close friends today. So number one, it's really important to be involved with people that you really would want to be friends with, that you really have shared values. It is like a marriage, you need to have shared values in a marriage. And so it's really similar to that. It's really helpful to have complementary skill sets. I really love marketing, and I kind of love team building, and I love project management. But I'm not a great engineer. I mean, I've programmed before, but I'm no good at it. My Python book is still sitting on my desk. I'm still trying to get back into programming. But having somebody that's a terrific coder as a partner, or somebody that's got a terrific skill set for doing apps or whatever it is, then just being complementary to those is helpful. And I think in my case, the fact that I like so many different things. I love nature, I love science, I love biology, I love technology, and I love music, and I love social sciences and all that. So being kind of scattered allows you to connect into the interests and avocations of your partners, and so that's a really good connection.
Was there ever like a time that you had to split with any partner?
I've never had one that we've actually had to split per se, and that could be because we have had a couple of companies that we actually got a year into the company and just had to say, this isn't going to work. But it wasn't because of the people at all. It was just because you invested a year and some of your money and time, and you realized there's either too much competition or it's too complicated of a marketplace or whatever. It's just not going to work. In most of the businesses I've been involved with, it's the nature of the business that you wind up with. I always have outside investors that come in and participate in them. So, by the time you're several years into a business, when you might wind up splitting with a partner, you really kind of can't, because you're both committed to all the folks that invested in your company, and they're helping to drive you to success, because you don't want to let anybody down.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's so many directions I want to take this conversation right now. So I'm going to try to remember all of them, so maybe we can circle back. Yeah. Let me jump into this word that I keep having pop into my mind as I'm looking at that at your timeline of history with all these companies. I mean, there was definitely times where you were doing more than one thing.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I mean, right? It just had to be. And
even today, I'm also the kind of titular CEO of a company called EEG Now, which is doing it's basically, if you will, like a little shower cap that has the 10-20 electrode setups that are necessary to do EEG monitoring. Which today, normally EEG monitoring is going to take somebody 30 or 40 minutes, with a trained technician to put all these little EEG monitors on to see if you've sustained a neurological damage of some sort in an accident or whatever. And this is something you can just pop on. Any technician can pop on, and in about 3 minutes they're recording EEG.
Oh wow!
So we just got FDA clearance for that recently. But
you're doing a multitude of things.
Yeah, and that also, that goes back to another company that we had started a few years ago, Optima Neuro. That was another University of Florida technology, and the principal researcher and PhD MD behind that is the principal PhD MD behind EEG Now. Okay. So again, that's just going back to
that connection.
As much relationship as anything.
Sure.
That you find people that are really brilliant, a lot smarter than you are. That's
right.
Always the secret. Find a lot of people that are a lot smarter than you are to be your partners.
Well, that's a great lesson to learn.
So that, yeah, so I'm doing those two things simultaneously.
So how do you balance it all? Like how, I mean, because I mean, like in entrepreneur, you hear kind of both things, right? And this is what I hear in entrepreneurship a lot. I hear, you should really stay focused on one thing, give it your all, give it your best, like stay focused. And then you have people saying, oh no, you should you need to diversify, you need to have multiple streams of income. I mean, that's really pulling from two ends, you know what I mean?
It is.
I mean, so how do you make the determination of what's right for you?
Yeah, well, and it really gets down to, on the business side too, that I hear that a lot about focus. And it is true that in the areas that you are committed to at that moment, you need to be able to really focus on those areas. But you also need to be able to pivot quickly. The one takeaway I can give you from all of the businesses that we've started, with the possible exception of one of those businesses, is that what we wound up succeeding at is not what we started out to do. In almost every case, we thought we were going to go one direction, but we kept our feet in two or three other streams and found really quickly that a couple of those other streams had pretty good current. And so we immediately pivoted and started focusing on those. Didn't necessarily stop what we were doing in the other one, but we changed our focus. And so the ability to change your focus, just like in your personal life, the ability to change your focus, to let go of something that you're worrying about, and to stop worrying about that and put your focus on something that's more constructive. It's the same thing that happens in business. And so that's one of the secrets to being able to do multiple businesses or multiple opportunities within a business at the same time, is that focus. You want to be able to focus, but you also want to be able to let go of that focus when it's obvious that you need to let go of it and put the focus somewhere else. So training your attention and your focus.
Has there ever been a time where you held on to something entirely too long?
Yes. Yeah. And this is not.
And then how did you realize that you're
sometimes you hold on to something too long because, in fact, all of the cases, I've had a couple of cases like that. But in both cases, it's been where, as I said earlier, I always bring in business partners, and you've got business partners who had invested, and they're just passive investors. The last thing you ever want to do is to leave somebody hanging. Even if, so in those cases, I've always felt like I have a commitment to spend at least several years of my life devoted to trying to turn things around for them, even if I don't make money on it. The prime example for me in that was real estate, and it was my only big venture into real estate. We built the Fenimore Mill project over at Cedar Key. If you drive over to Cedar Key, out on the end, there's this beautiful historic project called Old Fenimore Mill. And we started that project. It had great vision for it, had all the financing lined up. And just about the time we were halfway through construction, the Department of Interior came through and redid the coastal barrier island regs, and then drew the line in right through the middle of our property. And all of a sudden, none of the people that were going to buy our condominiums were able to get insurance. So completely screwed the project up. So we wound up doing okay on the project, but it was one of those projects where I spent probably 4 years working with no compensation, never made a penny out of it, but at least our investors came out whole. So sometimes you just have to hold on to things a long time because it's the right thing to do. And in the long run, everything works out if you always do the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that was Martin Luther King, that it's always the right time. There's never the wrong time to do the right thing, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe in that so entirely much. Do you ever get burned out? I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm almost getting exhausted listening to this entire list of stuff. I'm like, wow, man, you must be the most tired guy on the planet, because I'm just
I haven't gotten to some of the things that actually keep me running. Right. So the things that keep me running are, number one, I love what I'm doing, right? So, you could probably tell that. It's exciting. So
it's not work. You don't even look at it as work.
Definitely not work. It's definitely not work. I would go do this.
I mean, that's the secret.
Sometimes I do this for free for 2 years. I've been at Blue Zoo Scout for a couple of years now full time. All I do is just keep putting money in. I haven't made any money yet. So, I'm not getting paid for doing this. I do it because I really, really love it and enjoy it. The other angle is that when you are successful in business, it lets you do things in the world that are really meaningful. And among those meaningful things, for a number of years, we brought Challenge Day into the Alachua County schools. It's a really, really great experiential program where you bring a couple hundred folks from various aspects of life in a high school into a gymnasium and spend an entire day in a gymnasium with a couple hundred of these young people. And you're just sharing incredible stories that folks never wind up sharing, and doing it in these experiential exercises. And by about 2/3 of the way through the day, all these barriers between all the different groups and cliques at the high school totally melted, and people you would never expect to be hugging each other, and folks are crying. I mean, it's just like really meaningful stuff. So things like Challenge Day, really important. The work that the Cade Museum's doing on bringing young kids in from the east side, and kids that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to get in there and be exposed to the music and the creativity and the science and the technology. That's really exciting to me. So I love being involved with the Cade on that. About 15 years ago, we started a program in Cambodia called Sustainable Cambodia. And I'm blessed to have a really sweet wife that is my fellow volunteer with Sustainable Cambodia. But we have we're working in about 30 villages over there now in central Cambodia, in rural villages. We've got 6,000 kids in our schools. We've got
what led to Cambodia?
Pure serendipity. A friend of ours here in Gainesville, Bruce Lasky, was a public defender. Took a year off from his life 17 years ago or so, and decided to take a year and travel around the world. And by the way, I don't know if you can still do this, but it was a great thing at the time, and I think you can still do this. You can buy a round-the-world ticket that lasts for 1 year, and you can travel anywhere you want, anywhere in the world, as long as you go east to west or west to east, and you don't back up. And so he bought one of those tickets and got himself a backpack and just went from country to country to country to country. And one of the countries he landed in was Cambodia. Somebody said, let me take you out to these rural villages and show you where I grew up. He went out, saw those villages, came back. This was just when we were starting RTI. So it was in the IPO month of RTI when I got an email from him saying, it's like the Stone Age. These families have nothing. They don't have water, they don't have food, they don't have employment, and they're just out here. If everybody knows the Khmer Rouge story, it was this genocide that occurred in the aftermath of the carpet bombing that was done along the perimeters of the Vietnam War, and it disrupted the food supply in Cambodia, and created kind of a famine situation out of which this radical Maoist group came down from the mountains and decided to take over the country, and they wanted to return it to what they called Year Zero, of perfect peasant rice farmers. And so they sought out anybody that had an education and killed them. Anybody that had any exposure to a foreign culture, they killed them. Anybody that spoke a foreign language was killed. If you wore eyeglasses, you were killed. And everybody else was put into forced labor camps to grow rice. And so after a few years, there's nobody left in the country that has any educational background, and everybody's displaced. So that's the aftermath into which Bruce landed. And seeing what he did, he sent the email out. It's like the Stone Age here. Said, we'd like to we'll help you to start a little school over there. But after a couple of years, it was really clear that it wasn't going to be a sustainable school, because the families, they needed the kids to work in the fields. They needed the kids to carry water. So they needed to have income. So I took about 6 months off with my wife, and we went and studied different plans and programs, the way that these work around the world, especially Heifer International, which is a great organization. And we adopted a lot of their policies and created our own organization, and went over there as volunteers and just hired Cambodian staff. And our whole organization is based on, we have no paid international staff at all. We have no paid overhead. We fund all the overhead related to it. and we have all Cambodian staff. So we've got about 150 Sustainable Cambodia team members over there, half of whom are graduates who started out as little kids in our program, went through all of our schools, graduated, got a scholarship from us to go to Cambodian University, came back, and are now part of our team. But we've had about 400 graduates now that have gone through the university program in Cambodia,
Dang,
and about
cool.
6,000 kids in the program, about 30,000 families. So
again, another relationship that led to
Yeah.
your connection to something.
And part of the passion and reason for what I do. So, like I say, I love what I do with business and science and technology, but it's also the aftermath. It's the impact that you can have because of the wealth that you create.
Yeah.
You know, so the money that you create then gets to go out and replicate and do a lot more good. You know, one of my favorite sayings as I get older in life is that nobody gets to the end of their life and looks back and goes, oh, you know, I started a whole bunch of companies. That was great. Oh, you know, I employed a lot of people. That was great. You know, you get to the end of your life and you look back and you go, what did I really do to make a difference in the world? And, you know, so that's
when I look
that's
at
where the
you
heart
and
connection
like
comes from.
listening to you, I'm just like, man, like this guy is so fulfilled. You know, like you just, it's obvious to me that you found your purpose and that you know that purpose. Like, you know, we have a young audience. We have, you know, I'm trying to get more and more students to listen, and like, you know, I'm talking to, you know, as a 36-year-old entrepreneur that's surrounded by students here at the dealership. That's our customer, is 95% customer, you know, 95% students. I can't tell you how many people ask, like, how do I find my purpose?
Yeah.
You know, like, like, I mean, what would your answer be to something like that? What does somebody need to do in order to find out their reason for being here?
Yeah. So the first thing is I really, really congratulate them for asking the question, because that means that they're going to find the answer, right? I mean, the first thing is to know that there's something bigger than just, you know, just keeping up with the Joneses and making more money.
Right.
Science and data is really clear on that. I mean, if you go look at at family wealth and family income in the developed world and in the United States, there's a reverse correlation between wealth and income and quality of life. You know, the more money people make, the less happy they are. And the science and data on that's really clear. So asking the question means you're on the right path, you know. And I would say that it's always about just going out and finding any organization or any people that need help. The more that you're outside of your own head, the more that you're out in other people's lives and experiencing what they're experiencing and to some extent helping them through that, that's where you're going to find, and just keep doing that. You know, you'll find the right fit as you're going through that process. Doesn't mean you need to dedicate yourself to being a nonprofit person. You can tell I'm not a nonprofit person. You know, I believe in making money because money does a lot of great things in the world. But that's how you're going to find it, going and helping other people.
What do you do a lot of things to invest into yourself? I mean, do you listen to any podcasts or read books or?
Yeah. So on the reading side, I'm primarily on history. I really love American history, and you know, so I've read the histories on a number of our presidents in the U.S., but also especially Revolutionary War and Constitution. You know, the formation of the country. That time, that fulfillment, if you will, of the Enlightenment was really a great period. I think it's hard for me to believe that we had so many amazing things come together in the Constitution, and at the same time they left so many really important things out. Right. and yet they also knew that they were leaving them out, and they had to kind of compromise to get there, and they figured that if we create this beautiful document, it will become a living document, and that over time it will evolve into taking care of those things that we left out. And they trusted that from that Enlightenment perspective, and in fact it has happened. So I really like history. I love studying that, especially that period of history.
Does it help you in your business? Or is it just just something that you do to?
No, probably, especially when you're reading, you know, all the major decisions that folks have had to make, and at various times in our country's history and political life and the world's history. I mean, there are times when I'm sure that some of the decisions that I make are either colored by or guided by things that I've learned from reading history.
I've always had a super fascination with history, and I think the biggest reason, honestly, is because I went overseas for 3 years and lived in England, and when I realized that, wow, things are a lot older over here.
Boy, they are, aren't they?
I mean,
yeah.
If anybody has the opportunity to travel and go to Europe and explore, like you should absolutely do it, because I just realized, I was like, man, the United States is so young.
Yeah, I live in literally a historic home in the Northeast Duck Pond up there. It's built in 1941, and over in Europe you go to a historic home and it was built in 1280.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh, that's old. Yeah, it's amazing. And we took a trip to France and walked the beaches of Normandy, where the guys all came ashore and stormed those cliffs. And oh my God, when you walk underneath those cliffs, it's unbelievable. It's transformative. I encourage anybody that gets to Europe should definitely take time to do that. We were talking about things that sustain. So having that purpose for the money is a big sustaining element of it, and the work that you do with the kids and the Cambodians and all that, that's a big part of it. The fact that I love it and all that is a big part of it. There's also the physical side. I am a workout nut, so every morning I'm going to either be at the gym or running, typically at the gym, and I'll spend an hour and a half every day doing physical exercise of some sort.
I don't think people realize how important that is.
It's transformative. And again, on science.
That's the biggest investment that you probably can make into yourself is on the physical and nutritional side.
I completely, yeah. Certainly food and nutrition too. But I mean, again, I'm a science geek, right? So all the science and all the data just shows that everything from your neurological health to your mental health, to your emotional balance, and certainly your physical well-being, all of those things are tied to the level of exercise that you get. So getting out there and really just finding something that you're passionate about and doing, whether it's biking or swimming or gym work or whatever it is, or boxing.
Yeah, for everybody who was listening earlier, the boxing gym was thumping through the wall again, so I apologize on the audio. Yeah. It will not always be there, I promise.
But boxing is a great exercise.
Yeah.
Really good. So anything that you can do like that's going to really improve your life.
Can I want to kind of jump back into like the business stuff again in relation to going public. I mean, when did, because I know nothing about that process. Yeah. Obviously. I mean, what is that process like? When do you make a decision that, hey, this is definitely the time to take it public? I mean, can you just walk me through that a little bit? 'Cause I'm just kind of curious.
So obviously being a public company isn't going to be a fit for every type of business, right? It's got to be a business that has, at the very least, completely national scope, or probably ideally international scope, and then it needs to be something where, especially in today's markets, but even 15 years ago, you need to be having the opportunity for revenues in the 150 to 250 million minimum. So you've got to get over those kinds of levels, or be able to achieve those kinds of levels, and have a clear path to getting to that kind of revenue stream in order to consider being a public company. So when you're first starting your company, you should probably have some idea, is this a company that I might take public or not? Because if it is something that you might take public, you're going to want to do things a little differently as you grow. It's okay to spend a lot more money as you're growing, and to spend money on buying revenue, if you will, on building market share. And you can kind of grow with a deficit. You don't need to be making a profit if you're going to go public, because what you're really doing is just trying to grow revenue and get up to that 250 million revenue level or whatever, so you can do your IPO. There's a bit of a gamble, even if you are the type of company that can do that, because the markets are fickle, and there are times when IPOs are in vogue and times when they're not. So fickle with RTI. When we were getting ready to do our RTI January, February, March of 2000, Our bankers are all getting lined up. We're figuring out which bankers we're going to use. You do what's called a kind of a fashion show or whatever. You pick out the bankers that you want. They all come through and tell you what a great job they're going to do. We wound up choosing Lehman Brothers, they were a terrific team. It was a terrific firm, and Bank of America were our two leads. So as part of all that, we're getting ready to do the IPO, but it takes time. You've got to get audits, completed, and and everybody. You literally go up to New York and you'll sit around a table with 30 people, 20 of whom are high-paid attorneys from every one of the investment banks involved and from your own banks, and you're all sitting around going through page by page by page through those really long 150-page prospectuses, word by word, and nobody's ever going to read that stuff. and you all kind of know it, but it costs a ton of money and a ton of time. You get through it. In our case, we got to July, and we were just ready to pull the trigger on the IPO, and the bankers said, it's July, everybody's going to be going on vacation. Traditionally, everybody's gone from the mid-July to mid-August. He said, let's wait until everybody comes back in September. We'll launch this the first week of September, and it'll be a really successful IPO. We thought about it internally and said, you know what, we're all ready. We've got 2 weeks left before everybody must leave on vacation, so let's go ahead and do it now. We did it. We were successful with the IPO. The market crashed 3 weeks later and didn't recover. There wasn't an IPO done for 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
So everything that I described in this podcast would have probably never happened if we had taken the advice to delay just that extra 6 weeks and wait and go out later.
So it was just simply a gut instinct of now's the time?
It was, and it could have been 50-50 wrong. I mean, who knows? But it worked out. It worked out for the best. But yeah, it's just one of those things that there's a serendipity involved in an IPO.
Yeah, what's it like looking back to that moment now and being like, my gosh, if we hadn't done that?
Yeah, there was a really cute movie called Sliding Doors, which my wife and I have always loved. That is, about basically two different time frames that people take through their lives as, a door slides shut and slides open, and they take one path instead of the other. And then for the rest of the movie, you're following both of the two paths simultaneously.
Interesting.
And so that was our...
Never seen that.
That was our...
Seen that? Anybody?
That was our sliding door moment. Yeah. So, who knows?
What's your wife think of all this? I mean, you guys have been together how long?
Oh yeah, we just had our first 21st year anniversary. And I say first because she used to live in Tahoe, lived in Tahoe for most of her adult life before we married, and so when we got married here on the 19th and up there on the 26th in Tahoe. So we have a Gainesville anniversary and a Tahoe anniversary. I'm right in between them right now.
Okay.
So this Friday will be our Tahoe anniversary.
Okay, well, happy anniversary.
Yeah. And as to what she thinks of me, she thinks I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a very special woman to put up with entrepreneurs.
That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. And she's, and
probably husbands on the other way for women entrepreneurs too.
I'm sure. And she's got business background too. She, for a number of years, she ran did some of the central office stuff for Chart House, the Chart House chain of restaurants. So she's got kind of that national element of that, and she's got an accounting background. And she's
into a lot of that kind of stuff too.
And she basically runs the entire international office as a volunteer of Sustainable Cambodia with 150 folks involved in about a $500,000 budget, and just does all that as volunteer work. So she's got a pretty good. She's pretty busy.
Right in it as well.
She's pretty busy. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, good for her. Yeah. That's great. One of the questions, it's funny. Last night I put out a question saying that I was interviewing a badass entrepreneur this morning, and and I said, hey. Somebody sent me a question, and so one of the questions that I got asked, and I think it's a solid question, is if you could start all over again, what would you have done differently along your journey?
I read Car and Driver magazine, and that's always their last page in their magazine. They have a little thing where every month they ask somebody, so what would you have done differently?
Yeah.
And I always start to read that article and I go, nothing. There are so many mistakes that I've made in my life. So many times that I look back and I go, gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. If I had just done this instead, things would have worked out better. And yet, talk about sliding doors, there are 1,000 sliding doors from every one of those moments. I mean, if I were to go back and correct any of those things that I kind of wish I hadn't happened that way, everything that has happened since would be different. And I don't know. I mean, I live a really beautiful life. I've got, we live in the duck pond. It's like the most amazing part of Gainesville, in my opinion. I'm involved in the downtown. I love that. We get to go out to Tahoe, which is like God's country. It's amazing out there in Tahoe. My son and his wife built their house right behind ours, so we have shared backyards. I've got my granddaughter that walks through my little backyard to come see me. I'm like going, none of this might exist. None of it might exist if I had changed any of those things in the past. So
it kind of goes back to
I would say nothing.
Kind of goes back to your point earlier about just being able to make those little pivots and just recognizing.
Yeah. And that's probably the other side of it, is that if any of those things had changed, everything probably would have worked out. I'm more than a glass half full kind of guy. I really do believe in the long run that, that if you're doing things for the right reason, everything works out.
What do you think of I mean, you've been here a long time. What do you think of the change that has happened in Gainesville over all these years?
I love it. It's especially, downtown Gainesville and everything from the corridor from the university to the downtown. It's a really sweet and beautiful place to live.
Entrepreneurship, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before that, like, sometimes like entrepreneurship is kind of a fad in a way. Like, it takes a very, very special person to be an entrepreneur. And, you always hear that, I don't know, like 95% or something crazy of startups in their first 5 years, fail. But Gainesville has become such a hub of entrepreneurship. I mean, what advice would you give to a lot of those people that are probably going to fall into that 95% category?
I would say
and I don't know if that's like the legit statistic, by the way. I just know it's like an astronomical amount of startups fail.
Yeah. Failure is not a bad thing, right? I mean, there's got to be our whole evolutionary path as a species, and all the species on the planet have only evolved because of failure. So failure's really a positive thing, and so I would just say, as long as something feels right, and it feels in your heart like you're doing the right thing and you're going the right direction, keep working hard at it, keep doing it. If you'll know, I think, if things begin to not feel like they're aligned right. If they're not, you're going to have to let it go. Be sure that you take care of anybody that was involved that you have made a commitment to. Try to always leave things as positive as you can in the aftermath of that, and then pick it up and go start it again, because the next one's going to have a better chance of success than the last one. Every time, your next one's going to have a better chance of success than the one before it, because that's the way that evolution and failure work, is they make us better.
Is there a way somebody can recognize whether or not entrepreneurship is for them?
I think they just have to have a passion for it. Okay. I mean, it's just all about passion. It's all about heart. And then to be successful, you need to kind of learn as much as you can. It's difficult to go in and say, well, I'm going to be an entrepreneur if you don't know, how all the bits and pieces of that business work. So It's really important, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, in my mind, you need to know how the mechanics of the business work, what it's like to sit at the front desk and sell things, what it's like to be in the back clerking and getting things out, or manufacturing things or whatever. You just need to know how all of it works.
It's funny because when I look back at, my 14 years as an entrepreneur, I'm just very much like, man, I just went after the opportunity. I don't think I really ever realized that I was destined to be an entrepreneur. I just recognized an opportunity and I took it, and thankfully things worked out. And the more I dive deeper and deeper, I'm like, oh man, I take risks all day. It doesn't even bother me. And I mean, we got into a conversation just last night about being risk averse and that kind of thing. And I mean, risk just doesn't bother me at all. And I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I don't know that I've really worked for anybody since, I don't know, since maybe 13 when I was in the theater, in the movie theater.
For 35 cents.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Cool. Yeah. Well, man, thank you so much for being here. I mean, your story is just absolutely fascinating. And this biography, I mean, what's next? I mean, you're doing Scout right now, right? Like,
yeah, I really don't know. After Scout and after EEG now, those will take another 2 or 3 years to get them to fruition.
Yeah.
And I don't know what will pop up. There will probably be some opportunity. Do you just kind of like wait for things to come around the corner and see what the next opportunity is, or do you right now? Do you plan an exit strategy for organizations that you get involved in? No, I don't. And what I always try to do in the organizations is set the organizations up so that they would definitely succeed without me. Okay. And then the right time will appear for me to leave. So I don't ever set a timetable and say it's going to happen by a certain date. Gotcha. But that's again, if you're hiring people that are smarter than you are and are better than you are in all the aspects of running the business, that's kind of easy because I wind up not doing much, right? I mean, that's probably not true, but I do a little bit of everything. But there's somebody in every company who's better than I am at whatever they're doing. I'm pretty sure everybody's better than I am. I'm completely sure everybody's better than I am. Yeah. So we probably wouldn't make great business partners. We'd sit around and go, well, what are you doing? I don't know. What are you doing? Yeah. Yeah, well, we could always give it a shot. Yeah, that's right. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't give it a try. If you have any ideas, let me know. Well, very good. Hey, before we sign off, tell people where they can connect with you, whether that's with Scout, like social media, that kind of stuff. Through Scout, they can. Of course, our website is findmyscout.com. Okay. Findmyscout.com. And all the links to social are probably on there too. Yep, all the links are there. My company, Synogen, is actually Jamie Grooms and I are still the partners in Synogen. My original founder of RTI and Axogen and all those other companies. That's so cool. Those relationships, man, have just blossomed into new things. So Synogen, they can also visit the Synogen website. Okay, and do you guys, is that just Synogen.com? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, okay. Synogen.com. Do you guys raise money or anything for your Cambodia stuff? Yeah, so sustainablecambodia.org. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Sustainablecambodia.org. And folks can do everything from sponsor kids there. We've got individual child sponsorship of the kids that are in the various villages and the various schools, university scholarship students, and or you can donate wells and all sorts of stuff on the site. That's super cool, man. Thank you for doing that. Yeah. And just thank you for everything that you do for the entrepreneurial scene here in Gainesville. Thanks for being on our podcast and telling this awesome story. And, it was a pleasure having you. Oh, thanks for having me on. So Gainesville, there it is. Richard Allen, definitely support him and support his companies. And thank you so much for listening. This is the WHOA GNV Podcast, the podcast bringing you businesses and individuals that make you go, whoa. We'll see you later.